is Danny Mosca, otherwise known as Psychedillo. You may recognize me as the Wonder Woman cosplayer from previous Comic-Cons, maybe not. But regardless, I have all my cosplay adventures in my Instagram below. So, that aside, today we'll be focusing on turning this overall Wonder Woman look into a tutorial for not only the braces of submission, but the crown and the tiara too. So if you guys decide to make this and you want to post it, you want to share it, please tag me at Psychedillo just so I can check this out. I'd love to see what you guys make. I'd love to see what you guys are able to put together, and hopefully come 2021 I'll be seeing more Wonder Woman join me. So without further ado, enjoy the tutorial. For this tutorial you'll need a cutting board, some craft foam or cardboard, contact adhesive, a knife, scissors, a pen, and don't forget the pattern. Once your patterns have been printed out to the correct size, cut them out with scissors. Okay guys, super important. Once you've cut out your patterns, once you've cut out this tiara, just measure it up to your forehead. See, is this the right size? Does it sit nicely? Does it fit me the way I want? And if not, go back, reprint, resize until you are happy with the size that it's at, because once we get to cutting this out of foam or cardboard or whatever you decide to use, there's no going back, and you're going to save yourself a lot of tears and a lot of headaches, speaking from personal experience, if you just get the sizing right the first time. So just, it might seem silly, but just measure it up to your forehead and just make sure that it's something that you're happy with. Cool, moving on. Once you've cut all of the pieces out, make sure to lay down your craft foam or whatever material you'll be using for this project, and then place each and every one of the patterns or the templates provided down, and make sure you have enough space to trace around them. Do this for each and every single one of the pattern pieces. Then, once your pattern pieces have been traced out, grab a ruler and a knife, or if you're not as proficient with those, scissors works just as good, and cut out each and every pattern piece that you've traced onto your material. If you want to get the sizing right, make sure to cut directly after the line instead of on the line. That way every piece will stay at the correct size that it's intended, and then repeat this for every pattern piece thereafter. The next step involves using our roadmap of the tiara. We're going to use this to figure out exactly how we need to place our pieces and what goes on top of what, because it is quite a confusing combination of pieces. So you're going to lay the base one down, and then we're going to start with the second thing. Everything has been marked out with a number once you've traced it out, and you can follow that little diagram that I've provided for additional help. Otherwise, this tutorial should help you out. My biggest piece of advice when doing anything that has multiple layers is tracing out each layer with a pen just beforehand, so you know exactly where the glue needs to go once you stick things down. That way you don't have to fumble and you don't have to guess exactly where everything goes. Make sure to just completely outline the piece if possible, and that way you'll be saving yourself a ton of headaches later. Then, once you've traced that piece down, grab your contact adhesive. Hot glue also works for this, but I prefer adhesive because it sticks together better and it holds for longer. So you get more use out of it. But you're going to put the glue on both pieces that you're sticking together, because contact adhesive sticks to itself rather than sticks to an object. So if you happen to get too much glue down, that's not a problem at all. You can use a scrap piece of foam or piece of paper and use it to kind of smooth out the glue. The thinner the glue, the easier it is for the glue to adhere to itself and cause a stronger bond. Make sure to do this on both pieces, like I said, that way you'll get an optimal bond between the two. After that, leave the glue to dry for about maybe 10 minutes or until the glue feels tacky. You can test the tackiness of the glue by just tapping on it, and if it has a slight stick to it rather than a gooey feel, that's when you know it's about right. So take your pieces and slowly, very slowly start sticking them together. The glue is extremely strong, especially when bonding to itself. So you're going to have to go slowly and make sure that each and every area lines up with the other. With this back piece, we're not going to be flipping the piece over when sticking it because it kind of sits face up right underneath the original base piece. So for this, you're just going to need to glue it the same way, glue the back of the base piece, and you'll see in a second when we stick it down, it will continue to stay face up. I found that it was easiest to stick the two together once you'd flip the base piece over, just so you can make sure that it's sticking out at the right height that you want and you're getting everything to line up perfectly, because we're essentially going to be seeing the front of the tiara rather than the back. So the back is allowed to be messy, it's allowed to be imperfect, but the front you want more or less accurate. And once again, we're going to repeat the process for the next step. This goes on top of all of the pieces that we've glued so far, and once again, trace it out. The next piece sits on top of everything we've glued so far. This one is a bit of a tricky one because you need to make sure that there's a gap between the two pieces that sit on the side. This is stylistic and it appears in the design, so you might have to warp the foam ever so slightly, kind of tug on it, or if it's cardboard, you might not have as much leniency, but just arrange it in such a way that it's possible for you to just get things to line up evenly on both sides. Then remember to flip the piece over, glue it down, and then do the same for all of the pieces that we've stuck together so far. Once again, remember that it's best if there's as little glue as possible. If the glue is as thin as possible on there, you're going to get a better bonding between the two. So if too much comes out, just smooth it, it should be fine. Then let it just sit for however long it needs to sit, until it gets tacky. This piece might give you some trouble when sticking it down, as like I said, you might need to pull on the foam, you might need to warp it and bend it just to get it to sit exactly where it does. I would highly suggest starting at the corner at the bottom of the tiara. That way you know that it's centralized and it's positioned properly, and then from then on you can warp the foam without causing too much of an issue for the overall design. Just make sure not to drop it onto the contact adhesive. That thing will stick to itself and, like I said, you won't get it back. Make sure to press everything down, and then we're almost done with the building of the tiara, which is pretty exciting. The next steps involve the two little stars that sit at the very top and the center of the tiara. These might be a little tricky because you want them to sit within the boundaries of the other pieces that you've stuck down. Once it's tacky, go ahead and stick it down. And then do the same for the next star. This is the last part of the building process and most exciting. Once again, if it's slightly too big or if it's not looking the way you want it, just trim it down with some scissors until you're happy. And with that, the building process is essentially finished. We've put the base together, we've put all the pieces necessary together, and we have our completed tiara. But the tiara is completely 2D. It's super flat. This is an optional part of the tutorial, but what I like to do is put a bunch of pins together. You can see I've used some foam to kind of stick them together, and I find that my props look authentic, especially when it comes to replicating movie ones, if they have a bit of texture to them. So this is completely up to you, but for me I decided I wanted some texture in my tiara. So using the pins, I'm just scoring the foam. I don't think this will work for cardboard, unfortunately, but for foam you can just use those pins and they create little lines in the foam that just give it a bit of dimension, give it a bit of almost wear and tear. It looks like it's some form of metal that's been forged by the gods, if that makes sense. So it's a bit tedious. Like I said, it's an optional part of it, but I do feel like it gives the overall look and feel, it just gives it a little bit more oomph, if that makes sense. Because we don't want the tiara to stay flat, I would suggest, and this is also an optional step because it depends on what you have at home, but I would suggest using a heat gun. A heat gun helps a lot more to get the foam heated up, and once the foam is heated up it becomes malleable and you're able to shape it easily. So because we don't want our tiara to sit completely flat, we want it to have a little bit of a curve to it because it has to sit across the forehead. We're going to use the heat gun to heat up the foam a bit until it gets soft enough or malleable enough for us to just bend. Now we're moving on to the painting process, which to me is the most exciting part of any build. For this you're going to need a primer. I personally use Plasti-Dip. It's almost like a spray paint that coats things in a rubbery surface. For me, I get the best results out of this, but it's not available to everyone, so otherwise I would suggest using something like Mod Podge or wood glue and just paint that on, because unfortunately foam is a very porous material. Painting directly onto that foam is just going to cause the foam to suck the paint in and you won't see any of it reflect on the surface. If you are doing this with cardboard, you might be able to skip this step. You'll need spray paint, gold, obviously because the tiara itself is gold. You'll need some black acrylic paint, some brown acrylic paint, an old cloth or a rag, and a paintbrush. You can't see it properly in this specific clip, but because the Plasti-Dip is blue, but I've gone and I've primed the whole tiara with the Plasti-Dip spray. Next we're going to take that primed tiara and we're going to spray it with some gold spray paint. You can notice how shiny that is, and that's perfect, that's exactly what we want. But we're not going to keep it that way. This step is completely optional, of course. If you want a shiny gold tiara, that's perfectly fine, there's nothing bad about that. But I feel like there's a way to get this even better than it could be. And this is going to be done through using our black acrylic and our brown acrylic. We're going to mix these two colors together and we're going to kind of cover the tiara completely with them to give it a weathered and a worn and battle-scarred look. So, taking the two colors, make sure to mix them together to get a really dark brown color. It's really up to you what kind of feel you want to give it to. I usually stick to dark brown, almost black, because it gives a more like dirt-filled or grit-filled look to the tiara. But once you're happy with the paint itself, go in and fill in the entire tiara. This step is really nerve-wracking if you haven't done it before, because you're looking at that nice gold tiara and you're watching it being destroyed slowly, but I promise that there's method to this madness. So you're going to go and you're going to paint over the entire tiara. Make sure to fill in all the little grooves and all the little ditches, fill it up to the corners, just shove that paintbrush in and get it everywhere. It is very nerve-wracking, like I said, but I promise that there's method to this madness, and you'll see just now. Wait for the tiara to dry for just a little while, until the paint isn't quite entirely dry, but it's not too wet either. After this, we're going to take that old rag that I mentioned earlier, and we're going to use it to kind of buff off the paint. But you're going to try scratch that paint off with the cloth. But not entirely, we don't want to get it to that same level of shine that it was before. So we're just going to rub it enough to get the paint to stick where it needs to stick and to kind of darken that gold a little bit. You want it to stay in all the grooves and all the edges to create that real authentic metal look. Some of the paint might be a little bit stubborn, I struggle with it at bits, but that's okay. If it doesn't come off, it just adds character. Like I say, every mistake is just battle scarring or battle damage, so it's all right. You can already see how much of a difference this made compared to the original tiara. It now looks like metal as opposed to a fake. It doesn't have that fake shine to it. It has that more worn, dulled, sat on someone's forehead for a significant amount of time and throughout battles look. And that's what we're going for. For this portion of the tutorial, you'll need one cutting board, some contact adhesive, a knife or box cutter, scissors, and a pen, ruler, and of course the patterns for the bracelets. Go ahead and cut out all of the pattern pieces available. Like with the tiara, once you've cut out the major base piece, you're going to want to take it and measure it up to your arm. Because like with the tiara, if it isn't the right size and it doesn't fit and it's not something that you're happy with, there's no way of fixing it once we get past this point and once you start cutting things out. So just make sure that the fit is something you're happy with, that you can flex your wrist, that it sits exactly where it needs to sit, which is right by the elbow. And if not, reprint, resize until you are happy. And yeah, once again, it's going to save you a ton of time and a ton of stress. Once all your patterns pieces are cut out, just make sure to separate the detailing from the base piece, because this is what we're going to be working with first. Lay out the base piece on the craft foam or the cardboard, depending on what you're going to use, and trace it out. Because we're making two braces, make sure to flip the pattern and trace it onto the other side. That will make sure that you have two opposite facing patterns. Once you've traced these pieces out, make sure to cut them. I've used a craft knife for this, but if you're not proficient, just like with the previous tutorial, feel free to use some scissors. There's really no difference aside from the lines possibly being slightly neater or more accurate by using a ruler and a craft knife. Once you've traced out the main base pattern, grab some scissors and cut it along the separations that you'll see in the center. This will create the detailing pieces that fit within the bracelets. Once you've cut out all the pieces, make sure to lay them out on the craft foam or cardboard or whatever surface you decide to use to make this. We're going to do exactly what we've done before. Trace each and every piece out. Make sure to flip it because you're doing 2 of them, and then cut them out. Once again, scissors and craft knives are completely optional and whatever you're comfortable with. Be sure to repeat these for all the remaining patterns. Once you have all your detail pieces cut out, bring in your base piece back again. This is going to serve as something that we're going to stick everything to, and just lay out and mark where each and every detail sits on that big base piece. This will help when we're gluing down and getting the order right when it comes to every single one of the pieces. I find that pinning everything in place helps keep everything perfect, neat and orderly, and I usually do that while I'm busy tracing out my pieces. So after you do that, make sure to take all the pieces off the base piece because we're going to start the gluing process. Much like in the tiara tutorial, you're going to use the contact adhesive to glue all of this down. Now contact adhesive, like I've said, glues to itself instead of one side being glued and the other being smooth. So make sure to go ahead and glue all of your pieces together and all of the pattern pieces on the base. Let that sit until it's tacky and then start piecing the details on one by one. Next up, after you've done that, is going to be the detailing pieces. Now, as with the tiara, things can get a bit tricky as pattern pieces overlap each other, some sit underneath, and all of that. So we're going to trace out exactly where they need to sit and kind of figure that out beforehand. And trace them all onto the place that you're going to be sticking just to avoid any stress and any confusion as to where you need to glue. The top pieces of these braces or bracelets have been marked with numbers, so number 1 being the one that sits at the very bottom, number 2 being the one that sits directly on top of that, and number 3 being the top and upmost one. And then obviously go ahead and trace every single one of the pattern pieces for just this top section for now. We'll be moving on to the bottom section soon. With the gluing process, go ahead and glue every single one of the areas that you've marcated with a pen. That way, you won't have to wait for individual drying times if you just glue one piece down at a time. So go ahead and glue the entire area as well as all the individual pieces. This will save you time in the long run, trust me. Once your glue is tacky, take each piece and stick it down onto the marcated area. You might have to manipulate the foam depending on how it sits. And where each area overlaps, like for instance pattern piece number 2, overlaps ever so slightly with pattern piece 1, you might have to go back and you have to glue again, just to make sure that every surface area is completely covered in the glue so that everything stays flush and everything stays put. Because pattern 3 sits on top of all of them, you might only have to trace that one out afterwards, which is exactly what I've done here. That way you can get all of the pieces completely glued out properly. You make sure everything has the amount of contact adhesive it needs to stay in place. Once this is dry, stick it down like you have with the rest. We're nearly done with the construction, just need to move on to the bottom now. With the bottom pieces, just do as you've done before, lay them all out, make sure they're all sitting the way they need to. It's okay if pieces are overlapping the base ever so slightly, it just gives you a little bit of ease of access and room to wiggle around with, and trace them all down. Once this is done, we're going to go in with glue again and stick everything down. This is far more simple than the top pattern because everything sits one next to another rather than just overlapping pieces and pieces crossing in and out and under, so it's pretty self-explanatory. Once this is done, stick all of the pattern pieces down. Now we're going to go and cut off the excess that is hanging over the sides of the base pattern. These are completely unnecessary, so we could just use something like scissors to just quickly cut them off and get the look that we want. And that's pretty much the construction phase done. Just like the tiara pattern, you want this bracelet to sit around, to wrap around your arm rather than sitting completely flat. This isn't a completely necessary step, but it is one that will help you keep its shape when you paint it later on and you prime it. So I would recommend doing it, but if you don't have the necessary tools, it's perfectly fine. So you're going to go hit it with that heat gun, get it nice and warm, and then start molding it into the kind of general shape that you want, which is obviously curved to fit onto your arm and wrist. Moving on to the painting process. For this you're going to need a primer, Plasti-Dip as mentioned. You're going to need gold spray paint, silver spray paint, some black acrylic, some brown acrylic, and some silver paint, whether that's acrylic or not, just for touch-ups, and of course a paintbrush. After you've primed your armor, you're going to go ahead and with the gold spray paint make sure to get all the detailing on both the top and the bottom of your bracelet. We're not necessarily needing to spray the rest of the bracelet. Once you've spray painted the gold, or painted the gold on, we're going to get some masking tape or painter's tape depending on what you want to call it, and we're going to use it to cover up the gold areas that we've already painted. Make sure that the paint is completely dry for this, otherwise you'll rip it off. This is going to be done in order to protect the gold paint from the silver that we're about to spray on. It's important to note that it's best to use masking or painter's tape for this step, as sticky tape or normal sellotape is a little bit too sticky and will definitely end up ripping not only the paint off but possibly the foam. So I would highly recommend using something that has a slight adhesive like this. Once your bracelets are all taped up, you're going to go and you're going to spray that silver on to get that nice finish in the center of the bracelet. Since we don't need the masking tape anymore, since the final thing has been painted, we're going to go ahead and remove that. Because it might be a bit hard to mask very specific detailing, I would recommend just covering the whole thing and then going back with the silver paint that I mentioned you might need earlier, and just using that to touch up the little in-between bits, the little pieces of underbelly that you can see poking through the details at the top specifically. Because this is acrylic and not spray paint, you might have to do more than one layer in order to cover up that gold that sits underneath. So make sure to paint and then let it dry for as long as possible, then go in with another layer. Once this is done, we're finally moving on to the weathering process. This weathering process is exactly the same as what was done with the tiara. You're going to mix a nice dark brown. Like I said, for mine, I like to keep mine as close to black as possible, but with that tinge of brown. But I find that with silver, heading towards black works a little bit better. Same as you did with the tiara, cover the entire bracer with this paint. Get in all the nooks and all the crannies and all the crevices. Make sure to really get that paint to stick on, because later when we rub it off, it's going to keep that gritty, used and worn feel. Otherwise, if you want a super shiny bracer, that's perfectly fine, and this step is completely optional. It's really dependent on you. Once you've let the paint dry for a time that's honestly specific to you, just make sure that it's not too wet and not too dry. Grab that cloth or rag that you have lying around and use that to kind of buff off the paint that you've now left on the bracer. If it gets a little bit difficult to get off, you can easily dip that rag into some water and it should help wipe away the paint that's on there. Otherwise, you can try fight it off. I think you can see me struggling in this tutorial a little bit to get some of the pesky bits that wouldn't come off. But honestly, the more grit the better in my opinion. It just gives that more authentic look. I find that weathering makes quite a difference, and as you can see, it's taken something that's super shiny and almost very unbelievable and toy-like and changed it into something that makes you go, huh, maybe that is metal. I just think it's a very worthwhile effect. After the weathering, both props are technically done. You're good to go. Now we just need to figure out how to get them to stay on us. I'm pretty sure everyone has elastic laying around their houses these days. You can stick it onto the back of your tiara and this kind of creates a little slip-on hat that you can fit over your forehead. It will be completely adjustable to your forehead and your head size, so be sure to measure the elastic and measure the tiara first before cutting anything. The same can be done for the braces. You might need to stick 1, 2 or 3 pieces of elastic onto the inside of the bracer just to keep it on your arm. Otherwise, if you want to get fancy, you can do what I've done with my own props. So, with the tiara, I've gone and I've taken an Alice band and I've stuck that on the inside of my tiara, so that forms a natural curve and that pretty much keeps it on my forehead without the need to wrap something around the back of my head. And then with the bracer for my own, I've gone and made actual straps out of fake leather, just to give that authentic look. And each strap is held together by press studs. But like I said, this is a completely advanced step, and if you're well into cosplaying, it might be a worthwhile idea, but otherwise, it's truly up to you how you want to go about this. So guys, once you've completed the previous steps, make sure to repeat it for the second bracer. Otherwise, you'll just end up with one. And they wouldn't be called the bracelets of submission if you only have one of them. So repeat it for the second one. That way you'll end up with the bracelets of submission and a tiara. And yeah, you know what? I'm feeling like maybe Wonder Woman should make a return. So without further ado, well, that's it. Hope you guys enjoyed the tutorial. Hope you learned some things. Hope you're able to put these bracelets of submission and this tiara to good use and go out there and fight some crime. Don't forget to tag me in any of the stuff you make on Instagram. I'd absolutely love to see what you guys come up with. Love to see fellow Wonder Woman enthusiasts. And yeah, have a great day and enjoy the rest of Comic Con Africa.